Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of Self Pub Sunday. Today, we're joined by Jolie, author of The Bleeding Stone and the Spellbinders and Gunslingers series. Did I get that right?
Yep, nailed
Okay,
it.
I wrote it down wrong the first time, so I want to make sure I said it right. So, welcome, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks for
so
having me,
excited
Kate.
for this conversation.
Yeah, been looking forward to it all week.
Good. So let's start with an icebreaker.
hmm
In your announcement earlier this week, you mentioned cheese.
Yeah, I did.
I love cheese. My body doesn't love cheese so much. I'm partly lactose intolerant,
hmm
but I love cheese. So what's your favorite cheese that you've ever had?
Oh man, like so I love cheese, but I don't like branch out too much. So I'm good with like a nice sharp cheddar or something.
Mhm.
I've been up to like the Cabot outlets in Vermont a few times and just like bought my weight in cheese.
As
And
one does.
Yeah, but I think like the best cheese I've ever had. I don't even know what cheese it was, but I was in the Netherlands in like some tiny village, like about like 2 hours north of Amsterdam, and and like I got pizza there, and the cheese on it was absolutely incredible. Like
Mm,
literally the best cheese I've ever had. I don't know what it is, but
interesting.
um, pro- probably like some mix of something, but yeah, like if you ever want to if you ever want to go out of your way for incredible cheese, just go to like a remote village in the Netherlands.
Noted. I think my favorite cheese that I've had, um, it's called drunken goat cheese. They have
Okay.
it all over down here. It's like a soft, uh, semi-soft goat cheese,
hmm
but it's soaked in wine.
Ooh.
And it's so good. It's addicting. Like they have it in like the little, like the square or the triangles.
hmm
Uh, and I'll go through like one of those before I
Yeah.
even realize that it's done.
Yeah, we my fiance and I we our fridge is always stocked with like blocks of cheese.
Yeah, my family,
So
like, we have a family gathering, and, like, the first thing that they take care of is, "Okay, who's bringing what cheeses?"
mhm. Yep, that's a like any gathering that we do, we have like some charcuterie board of like random different cheeses. So like like we go all out for that. We take charcuterie very seriously in this household.
Awesome. So now that we've gotten the hard questions out of the
hmm
way, um, let's talk a little bit about your writing career.
Yep.
So, did you always wanna be a writer?
Yeah. So I guess I always had kind of like that creative um, gene. Like when I was a kid, I was always writing like random stories that popped into my head that didn't really make sense, but it was just still, like I was 7 and thought, hey, this sounds cool, and then I would write it for an hour and never go back to it. But for and like that still continued on like through high school and all that. But once I got into college, I was actually focused on going into academia for a long time. So like creative writing kind of fell to the wayside by there. But um, but yeah, I was I did my bachelor's, did my master's, and then decided to do another master's for some reason. But midway
I've
through
done
that,
that.
midway through that, I kind of just burnt out on academia and realized, what, maybe the reason I'm not actually enjoying all this is, or the reason I'm not like really grasping all this is that I'm not enjoying it. Um,
Yeah.
so kind of, but all that time I was still, like working on writing because I was studying history, which is a very
Mm.
writing intensive career
Yeah.
path. Um, so I was still like developing as a writer, just as an academic writer. And then after I kind of burnt out and shifted focus back to like stories that had been in my head since I was in high school, I like kind of just started honing that a bit more and been like pursuing like a writing career since about 2018 or so. And written a few different things since then. A couple finished manuscripts, some short stories here and there, and then what eventually turned into The Bleeding Stone, which came out last December.
I can totally relate to the burnout in academia.
Mm-hmm.
I am on my second master's degree, and I have the conversation with myself all the time, like, do I really need a second master's degree?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're studying, right?
Yeah.
Like for me, it was because my goal was to go all the way, get a PhD, but
Mm.
but at the same time, when I was kind of in a gap year between masters and hoping to do a PhD program, and I did get into one in London, but I didn't get funding, and I didn't want to live off of like whatever I find in a dumpster for 4 years.
Like a Dickens character.
Yeah, pretty much. So I yeah, so I jumped on another master's at that point for something that was like tangentially related to what I was studying in my undergrad, and didn't like it.
Yeah.
So you know, again, don't let this dissuade you from continuing on with your
Well,
with
I
your current
am
program.
very
But
close to finishing it.
okay, well
I've
that's
got
good.
like a couple classes left.
Okay,
They were related. So my first degree was an MFA in creative writing.
okay, perfect.
And I I really enjoyed my time there, but I always felt out of place. Like
Hmm.
didn't I belonged in the place, but not in the program.
Right, right.
Um, but my mom, like I went to grad school because my mom kept pushing me to go back to school because after I graduated my bachelor's degree, the only place I could get a job with an English degree was working for her in a nursing home.
Mm,
And she knew I was miserable, but that was the only thing I could get. I couldn't even get interviews.
hmm.
And then I was like, well, I don't know what am I going to get my graduate degree in? I'm like, I've just always read books and created random stories. And
Hmm.
then I just discovered the creative writing program. I'm like, I guess this works.
Yeah,
And then
like
I
it.
learned that there was a library degree.
Oh, yep.
And because I became really close friends with the university librarian
Hmm.
at the place I was doing my graduate degree in. And I told her my story, and she's like, you really just need to get your degree in library science. I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Hmm.
I grew up in a very tiny town where we had to go to another town to just go to the library, and all of the librarians were old ladies. So I thought like you just had to like start there from day one and work there forever, and there was like no in unless someone died.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same deal with the library in my hometown because it was like the size of somebody's house.
Right.
So like when I branched out to like when I went to college and just like seeing it's like, oh, this is a very big house. Didn't realize that libraries would be this big.
Right.
Um,
Or a
but
town with multiple libraries in it. What?
yeah, I mean, my hometown doesn't have multiple libraries, but there are multiple WalMarts for some reason.
We had multiple gas stations.
Yeah,
We
I
had like one at each end of the town.
yeah, like true to being in Massachusetts, like there's a very high tally in my hometown of Dunkin' Donuts.
Yes.
I I think maybe like 10 years ago, like my hometown is maybe like 10,000 people, but there are I think like 10 years ago there were maybe like 10 Dunkin' Donuts. So
Nice.
so
We had
one
to
for
go to
every
the
1,000
town over
people.
to get Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah,
But
I'm a
we
true
did have a killer ice cream store. So,
yeah. There's a
and
nice there's a farm like the next town over that does like incredible homemade ice cream. So go there all used to go there all the time.
Ice cream is also near and dear to my heart.
And how can it not be, right?
It was so funny because our ice cream town, the ice cream store's name was called the Main Scoop, and it was on Main Street in the town of Maine.
Perfect.
And that was like where everyone went. It was like the gossip place.
Oh yeah.
So back to your writing career.
Yeah.
Who are your writing inspirations, or as I like to think of them, writing heroes?
So when I really started getting back into just like reading fiction about 5 years ago, who really got me back into uh, reading for enjoyment was John Gwynne.
Hmm.
Um, so so John Gwynne, for those unfamiliar, wrote The Faithful and the Fallen and Of Blood and Bone series, and he's currently working on the Bloodsworn saga, which is I think it's these ones right here. The
Okay.
Shadow of the Gods and Hunger of the Gods are the ones that are currently out. Um, but he, um, like, what really drew me in with his works was just like his very approachable prose, and then also just incredible battle scenes. Because um, he's in real life, he's also a Viking reenactor, so he is able to draw so much from that experience into like getting really into like really behind a shield wall, and like you really feel like you're in a battle. So where uh so I've always tried to do like have like um that kind of like that same approachable prose, and when I write battle scenes I try to get like right into the thick of it.
Mhm.
So he's definitely a big influence for me. Another one is Joe Abercrombie, because his like snappy dialogue, probably like unparalleled character work of any author, in my opinion. And as far as grimdark goes, he probably does grimdark better than any other author, because he doesn't focus on like the gritty, gory aspect of it. He focuses more on the like the morally gray aspect of it. And even when I started writing The Bleeding Stone, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make this a grimdark. And then I kind of started to shy away from that, because I feel like grimdark, as much as I love it, I feel like there is kind of like almost a little bit of a negative connotation to the term, just because it's also very associated with kind of more like oppressive, like the oppressive doom filled, like gritty
Mhm.
atmosphere that not it doesn't appeal, it doesn't have a wide appeal necessarily,
Right.
as much as I love it and as much as I think more people should read it. But um but then like once I like, actually started pulling back a bit more, it's like, you know what, this isn't really that gritty, this isn't really, they don't really have a lot of morally great characters, so I guess this isn't grimdark. But it's still a genre that I deeply enjoy. And then other and then obviously like the mayor of fantasy, Brandon Sanderson, just for uh, world building, magic systems, trying to create, you know, like believable systems that um, you know, like that have rules and structure that, you know, kind of help bring you in more into that world. So those are definitely like the three main literary influences, and beyond that, like extending to like more video game sphere. Yoko Taro, who was the writer for the Nier games of Nier Automata, and then Tetsuya Takahashi, who is the head of the who headed Xenogears, Xenosaga, Xenoblade. Just their unique approaches to storytelling. They've all kind of, you know, all five of them really kind of like trickled in and like create like some weird mishmash of whatever the hell I write now.
Awesome. So speaking of your writing, let's talk some spoiler-free talk about the Bleeding Stone.
Yep.
So, um, can you give folks out there that might be watching this
Mhm.
a elevator pitch of what the Bleeding Stone is about?
Yeah, so the Bleeding Stone, which I have right here, it is a historical epic fantasy, basically focusing on a war of conquest, but told from the perspective of the indigenous peoples who live there. So it was very much inspired by like Age of Exploration, and Age of Discovery, but like but also um, a reaction to my own negative view of how history is taught in the U.S. And how basically how whitewashed it is. And when I started writing it in 2020, it was a like just like a way to air those frustrations because they weren't really conversations that a lot of people were having, or at least not to the extent I would have liked. And then about 2 months later, I after I started writing it, was when George Floyd was murdered, and then we did actually start having these conversations. Um, so it's kind of like my contribution to that conversation, like several years late, but it's still my contribution to that
Yeah.
conversation.
It's never too late for a conversation like that.
Right.
Um, so you touched on this a little bit in your elevator pitch, but what makes the Bleeding Stone or this series different than other historical fantasy series?
Well, I think there's a I think one, you don't often see those stories told from like more like an indigenous perspective. So that was, and obviously I'm not Native American of any ancestry. I am very clearly white, so this is not like an own voices story at all, and I fully acknowledge that. Fully acknowledge that some might find that a little problematic, but I didn't write. I tried my best to like avoid like stereotyping in this as well, and but the but as far as where it differs, like I just didn't like, how do I put this? Like it was like it felt like such a like an underrepresented group that wanted to kind of have like that representation, um, and kind of create a story that you know you don't necessarily see all the time on store shelves. And I you know yeah, it was, I don't know, I'm completely lost my train of thought already. But um yeah, no, it was basically just like what I something that I would have loved to have read, like growing up, like
Mhm.
like all those like westerns
Yeah.
specifically, like it's always like the Native American is like the noble savage who needs to be driven off of land. And 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 in recent years we've had kind of more like those revisionist westerns that are like actually depicting them as humans, with like actual cognition and like treating them like the people that they actually are. And that's something that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Something. So that's kind of, you know, that's kind of where I settled in on that. And then also like my historian brain just being like, okay, so all like I remember taking classes in college and learning different things that just were entirely counter to what what I learned, like
Mhm.
growing up in elementary school, middle school, high school, and that was just kind of that was like the conversation that I wanted to have
Yeah,
with this
absolutely.
book.
For me, it was learning about the Civil War
Hmm.
and the civil rights movement. And I was in like fifth grade, and I had a fantastic teacher who taught us like all sides of history.
Hmm.
We learned about, the civil rights movement and all of that, and we learned about, the women's suffrage movement and kind of like all the sides of history that you wouldn't normally learn in a US, especially small town
Hmm.
school. But I became like obsessed with slave narratives when I
Hmm.
was in 5th grade. Like I just soaked all of those up. I wanted to learn everything I could.
Hmm. Right. And like strange enough, like I grew up in southeastern Massachusetts, and like obviously Massachusetts is like a very liberal haven. But even like like those types of narratives were not part of like the
Right.
educational curriculum growing up, and you would expect that from, like, an area that is, well, to bring this kind of more politically, with a demographic that actually cares about history, and not like not like whitewashing it and
Right.
blanking it out.
Yeah. So where did you get the idea for the Bleeding Stone from?
So I have a very weird way of creating stories, and that titles will come to me first before I
Oh,
actually think of plots. So and it was like literally how it started was I'm just walking down the street and think, you know what, Spellbinders and Gunslingers would be sounds like a really cool title for something. Maybe I should think about this, and that's kind of how it started. Um, and yeah, it kind of started with like two warring factions, like Spellbinders versus Gunslingers, like magic versus technology, and yada yada. And then that kind of evolved more and more into like more like a historical narrative, and a and then that kind of turned into, like, this war of conquest, this like, and then that turned into, well, what about, um like, seeing, like seeing the results of, seeing the results of conquest, and basically, like, what about narratives from, like, Christopher Columbus's time, but not just like 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Like, what about what actually happened?
yeah.
Um, and then and then that turned into this conversation of, well, history being written by the victors doesn't necessarily mean it's the accurate history of what happened. Um, so then and then that kind of just like became the carrying theme for this book. So that's kind of like basically like the framing narrative of the Bleeding Stone and of the entire series
Mhm.
is history, is like a deconstruction of history being written by the victors, and basically just like the whitewashing of, like, of the atrocities committed in forging a new nation. So obviously, in like the prologue of Bleeding Stone kind of just
Yeah.
sets that up, where there's that challenge of, well, this is what our history says, but is it what actually happened? And I feel that it isn't. And
Right.
so um, and then that's kind of where we dive into what is actually happening. Um,
Yeah. So it's safe to say that the story came before your characters.
yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah, the general structure kind of fell into place, and where I kind of like broad strokes of where I wanted it to go. When I started outlining, but yeah, the plot, like the overall plot structure itself, came well before the actual characters.
Okay. So I'm going to take this moment and warn anyone out there who hasn't read The Bleeding Stone yet that we're going to go into spoilers. So if you haven't read it yet, go pick it up and read it and then come back and watch the rest of this. Or if you're like me and you don't really care so much about spoilers, then feel free to stick around. But this is your warning that we're not going to go into spoilers. So consider this your warning. I will also say that because I was battling COVID this past week, I didn't get as much reading in, and I have not finished the book, but I have like 2 or 3 chapters left.
Okay. Cool.
So I don't care about spoilers because I have a horrible memory, and by the time I get to stuff that's spoiled, I don't even remember it, and I'm like, sometimes I'm like, something about this seems familiar, but I don't remember like the specifics. And also like a lot of times spoilers will make me want to continue reading or go pick up a book because of what I've heard. So my comments will be, to what I've read, obviously. But feel free in any of these next questions to talk about the ending or whatever.
Sure. Sounds good.
I just wanted to put that out there so you don't think, well, all of these comments don't even talk about the end of the book.
Right.
I literally have it up on my other screen. I'm at 85%.
All right, almost there.
Right. I was like reading while I was waiting for you to join. I'm like, oh. So, with all of that said, who is your favorite and or easiest character to write? And feel free to answer one, both, or neither of those.
I honestly, Sen was the easiest and the most fun to write.
Okay.
Just because like it was like it was just like so enjoyable to just kind of like write someone that was like dealing with like very significant mental health issues. And like she very clearly deals with anxiety, with depression, with very obviously alcoholism. And then later in the book PTSD, or which I hope came across well enough. I feel like I had to rework that a lot, like when on prior drafts, but like it was just like it was like a ton of fun just writing her dialogue and just like really getting like into like the snarky, snappy dialogue that like I really just kind of like it modeled after like Joe Abercrombie's writing. And dialogue is something that comes a lot easier to me than actually describing action on the page. So like I always have to, whenever I'm just like jotting down like huge dialogue blocks, I have to remember, oh right, people are actually existing here too. I should like describe them as actually like visibly reacting to things. But and then just like her relationship with her siblings as well. And that was something that like my own relationship with my own siblings definitely drew some aspects from that. And I don't know, if like all of that just felt very organic when I was writing her scenes. So it was and then in subsequent books as well, in Children of the Black Moon, which is the second book in the series, which comes out at the end of May. It's a very different Sen than we see in the Bleeding Stone because of everything that's happened to her between her father dying, and actually and like I know you said you don't care about spoilers, but I do want to just like let those scenes kind of play out. Like what you said, 85%. So like what what chapter is that? Do you remember?
It's the chapter after her friend gets shot. They go and rescue her brother, and they're
okay. Yeah. So
that's the last chapter I finished. So I'm at the very beginning of that next chapter. I think. It's
okay. Yeah. So obviously Narva getting killed, and and you know like and other stuff will happen later. So like it just like obviously like this is overall her story, this whole series, and getting to explore not only just like the present timeline of like everything that's happening to her, but also like all the shit that happens to her in like those in the memory time, like the past timeline, and I just had so much fun exploring just like her psyche and all of that through
Yeah.
everything that happens to her.
She was my favorite character, and she was the character that me personally I was drawn to the most because, I just like said, I'm the middle child in my family.
Mm-hmm.
I am a bit of the outsider in my family. I'm totally different than everyone else in my family.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through alcoholism like Sen has gone through. I've gone through depression. I mean, depression and anxiety are, to me, one of those things that if you have it once, it's a lifelong battle.
Yeah.
It might not be there all the time, but it's that kind of, at least for me, is that thing that lingers in the back of my head and just like sits there and watches you all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I thought the thing that stood out to me from the very start of the Bleeding Stone was the sibling friendship and rivalry, and
mm-hmm.
that relationship with her brother and her sister felt so organic. Like you could tell that you have been in that kind of sibling dynamics where
Mm-hmm.
it didn't feel forced at all. Sometimes you read sibling stories and they feel forced for the story, but that the whole family in general
Mm-hmm.
and the tribes and looking at me, most people wouldn't think, but if you go back far enough in my history, one side of my family, I have Native American blood in me. On
Mm-hmm.
the other side of my family, I've got the Scottish settlers that came over, during the Revolutionary War and settled. So I felt like you did a really well job of writing the sibling dynamics there and the
Mm-hmm.
family dynamics and dealing with the tribes and how that's kind of a family in its own on top of the family, and Sen's sister having to now deal with that while Sen's going off to rescue her brother. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then going back to that point about just like mental health and like depression and anxiety, and like that's stuff that I've battled in the past as well, just like in at points significant severity, and yeah, just like just like being able to like kind of write that in a way that definitely like to me it feels believable because it's also stuff that I've dealt with. Like
okay,
it felt like a little cathartic in a way to be able to do that. And then even
absolutely.
like to your point about your own ancestry, it's kind of a little similar for me because I don't have uh, native ancestry, but I do have both Irish and English
Mm-hmm.
ancestry. So
Yep.
like still have like kind of like that like that colonization some like
Yeah.
further down the family tree, and you know and I guess maybe like the Irish and the English side are inside me are always fighting, so maybe that's just why I have anxiety. But but yeah, no, the like the sibling dynamics though, it's um and like the family dynamics, yeah, it's easy to draw from a lot of like lived experiences with that because I I like family is never like kind of like like smooth sailing for like there's always going to be issues that pop up with any family,
Right.
and some issues are more significant than others,
Yep.
but it's again it's like kind of cathartic in a way to be able to kind of pull from some experiences, good like both good and bad, and just
Yeah, absolutely.
sprinkle it in there.
Yeah. So, who was the hardest character to write?
um So I think either Aritz or Coele were probably the hardest, just because obviously they're like anytime you're writing like your main antagonist, you don't want them to turn into like a mustache twirling evil villain. You want to give them like some sort of depth, and
Right.
where and like with Aritz specifically, like I set out like he is like a parallel to Columbus, like
Yeah.
that I never shied away from saying that. Like that's like in my marketing material. Just say fuck Christopher Columbus. But it's I wanted to portray him as like, sociopathic without it just being like over the top.
Mhm.
And like that was definitely like very challenging in a way because like like I said, don't want to just be like mustache twirling and just
Right.
evil for the sake of. You want him to have like reasoning to do this. You want him to have agency and personality, and you kind of see this a bit in like the flash forwards
Mhm.
with his basically almost like god complex, and and we'll see in later books that will be like even further explored upon. But and then with Coele, it was like I didn't like while the invaders are like the core antagonist for the entire series. Like I didn't want it to be just kind of like a black and white good and evil type of thing where um like the only villains of the story were going to be the invaders. So I
Mhm.
wanted to have um like basically kind of like an enemy from within, essentially, and that's what Coele and what Fan turned into. And again, it's like trying not to create like a one-dimensional villain who's like counter to the main character's goals just for the sake of being counter to them.
Right.
Um, and like the and Coele specifically, and like later her followers, uh, like with this, I drew so much from like real world events and real world narratives, and like clearly like my biggest source of like current events inspiration with Coele was like Trump and like in like MAGA followers,
Right.
and it was very like isolationist and in a way almost xenophobic to Sen
Yeah.
because she is eclipse born, which is usually viewed upon with great distrust, and like it was very like like basically a closed mindedness to her existence and her continued presence within the tribe, and yeah, and like like um yeah, and like really like the more I wrote her, it was more just like, oh yeah, she is really just kind of turning into Trump, but that's okay.
So did you have a favorite scene from the Bleeding Stone?
um I think like so as far as like um more because like I think a lot of scenes that I really enjoyed writing were the ones that I was inducing the most suffering in. So I um so like when Sen's father is killed, I actually really enjoyed writing that scene, and like and then the subsequent chapter detailing the funeral and all of
Mhm.
that. But and just like Sen's visceral reaction to it, just like the stunned reaction where like she's like focused on like only like her father's dying before her, and she can only see that before her, can't like perceive like anything else around her, and then just like her emotional reaction to the two runaways who were in the village and like nearly like crushing Shara's brains out on the wall for it. Like it was such a, like an angry emotional reaction to it that like in a way it was almost like me like it was almost like kind of like a way to vent frustration in frustration that I created. It was a way to just kind of vent that a little.
Yeah.
But then with like happier scenes, like when Sen and Narva they escape the forest, they kind of have this like realization of their mutual feelings towards one another, because I knew I was again inducing suffering. I knew I was going to rip that away right very quickly, because I'm not someone who likes to write romance, and or like romantic subplots or anything. So I feel like that was kind of like my tease of like, okay, this is gonna happen, and then you know what, you like the romance, well, too fucking bad.
It's like when I'm watching a movie and the characters seem too happy,
Mhm.
then you know something's about to happen.
Yeah, because like there's I guess like where the there's like a very subtle, like there's definitely like some grimdark influence to this series, where there is still kind of like that like oppressive atmosphere to an
Mhm.
extent, because you know that like from the flash forwards, you know that this doesn't end well for the tribes.
Right.
So these brief moments of happiness, you know that they're not going to last very long. Um, so just like sprinkle those in is almost kind of like a signal that something is going to happen and something bad is going to happen. And um, so yeah, I'm I guess I am just kind of like Robin Hobb, and that I like making my characters suffer psychologically as well as physically.
Yeah.
So
Well, I could really appreciate the funeral scene, um, because growing up, I didn't have a great childhood, and my grandparents often served as better parents to me than my birth parents, even though my parents were in the picture the whole time. Um, and my grandpa was my best friend,
yeah.
and I took care of him while he was dying when I was in high school. And then my grandma wanted me to speak at his funeral, and I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I
Yeah.
had it all written out, I had it planned, but sitting there in the funeral, I was like, "Grandma, I can't do it." But
Right.
then fast forward a couple years later, when she died, I knew, as hard as it would be, that I had to speak at her funeral.
Mhm.
And so seeing the siblings have to speak at their own father's funeral just after he was murdered in front of their eyes. Well, I didn't have, the whole murder reaction and whatnot. My grandparents both died of cancer.
Mhm.
Um, I could feel that emotion in them because I had been in a similar situation where I was like, I don't want to do this, but I know that I have to do it. And I choked my way through this speech that I made, a horrible poem that I wrote too.
Yeah, with like I've never had to speak at a funeral, but I remember it was about like 10 years ago when my grandfather passed away. And just like for so long I was like I was keeping it together for
Yeah.
like through the wake, and then but then like the like the day of the funeral, I just remember it kind of sinking in, just like seeing the open casket right there, and just it's sinking in. It's like, oh, well, shit, this is the last time I will ever see him, and then like
Yeah.
that, and at that point, it's just like, okay, what, like I don't even know like what words I could even say right now, and like and in that respect, Sen was like just like, okay, she blames herself for it happening.
Right.
uh so like what words can she even say, like
Yeah.
not only to send her father off, but also just to like um quell that guilt within herself, that
Yeah.
like not obviously that's not something I would personally relate to, because like I've never felt responsible for somebody's death, but um
Maybe your reader's suffering though.
yeah, I can feel responsible for that.
Yeah, mine was, I wished that I had Sen's snarkiness.
Mhm.
Um, because for me, my grandma not only wanted me to speak at my grandfather's funeral, but right before he died, I wrote him this big long letter.
Mhm.
even though I saw him every day. I was at that point, I was like a junior in high school, and I had a hard time expressing myself verbally, so I would write everything down.
Mhm.
And I wrote him this big long letter about just what he meant to me and how he was like a dad to me, and he was, my best friend. And my grandma wanted me to read that letter
Mhm.
at his funeral, and I'm like, I know why, because it was really heartfelt, and it summed up my grandfather amazingly well.
Mhm.
But I also didn't think it was the time to bring up my other family business that
Right.
half the people at the funeral didn't even know existed or believe existed. And
Mhm.
so it's like, and I couldn't, as much as I didn't like my dad at the moment, this was his parents. This was
Mhm.
his dad that just died.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to drag him through all of that while also mourning his father.
Right. Right.
Um, but it was like the words were there. I knew why she wanted me to do it, but I I didn't have the snarkiness or the guts to say no
Mhm.
until it was like the moment to do it, and I couldn't, like, I was just a full-on mess. I couldn't even talk. So I'm like, I can't even talk right now, Grandma. How am I supposed to read this letter off?
Right. Right.
uh
Yeah.
so there are some, like you said, there are some really tough scenes
Mhm.
in this book.
Yeah, and like yeah, like some of that content, like I know like a couple people who have kind of they haven't been able to finish it because of like especially like a couple that commented like, yeah, that scene where her father dies is pretty tough. And like, yeah,
That kind
well,
of happens like pretty early on now.
yeah, yeah, it's kind of like the close, like the first act of the book.
Right. Maybe I'm just a morbid reader, but that like spurred me on to read like, what are they gonna do now?
Yeah, and it's a
Like I took a break after that
yeah.
and I went and read a chapter from something else because I always have several books going. So I
Hmm.
went and like got a snack and like played some happy music. But then I was like your book to me, I like, even though I haven't finished it yet, I can't stop thinking about it.
Hmm. Well,
Like,
that's what I like to
even if I
hear.
just step away for like 5 minutes
Hmm.
to go pee or something, it's like still lingers in my brain and I like have to go back to it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's fine. I appreciate hearing that because that's like kind of like that visceral reaction that I try to create with like some of these moments that are yeah they're gonna be difficult topics at times, but it's still I'd rather there be something to like kind of like shock and make you
Oh,
and
absolutely.
like yeah like, like make it that much more memorable
My
because
favorite books are the ones that make me feel something.
mhm,
Those are the books that'll get the higher ratings than a book that is technically written well. There's no errors or anything, but it doesn't make me feel any emotions, even happy emotions. I need some kind of an emotion. And this book gave me a lot of different emotions.
yeah, and like and it's always that tricky balance of like kind of like inducing those emotional reactions, but having them be like kind of worth that reaction,
Right.
like rather than it just rather than it being like a shocking moment simply for the sake of
Oh, yeah.
it should be like a shocking moment to like that actually serves a purpose to the plot. And like there have been recent reads for me that have had those shocking moments but they only seem to be there for the sake of being there.
Yeah.
And like and it's a tricky thing to do because it because like I don't think anybody actually like, sits down and writes something to be shocking just for the sake of being shocking. Like it it's a craft that you work at.
Right.
And the but yeah, like like hearing that, like hearing your reaction to that, like it makes it worth it.
Yeah. Well, and it, to me, it circles, as a reader, it circles back to earlier you were talking about, your villains.
Mhm,
And, you have to have purpose behind your villains. They can't just be villains for the sake of being a villain. They can't
mhm,
just be evil for the sake of evilness. They have to have reason behind that.
mhm,
And so I feel like your character work, they were all very believable characters.
mhm.
They felt like, you could just plop them out of a history book. Um, what was the hardest scene for you to write?
Oh man. So I think this is like right like where you're about to pick up from, but it's a big battle scene. It's like the first like significant battle scene that I've really had to write in anything. And um and again, like drawing from like the Gwyn influence of like just like getting right into the mud and muck of it. Like getting like that claustrophobic and like anxious feel to it. It was challenging, and but it was so rewarding to like get to like get it to paper. So it's obviously like the big battle like in the north that's been building between like Coelho's faction and like more like loyalists, I guess you could say. And I won't go into any more further details on that, just so you can like experience it firsthand. But it was it was definitely really hard to write because I've not done something like that before, and but at the same time, I think like the hardest ones to write are eventually the most rewarding to finish because it's kind of getting over that hump, getting over that challenge to
Right.
and um and then apparently I liked the reward so much that I put like 4 battle scenes in the next book. So including one
Awesome.
that's like the most ambitious thing that I've ever written. Like
Wow.
it's like easily the longest thing I've ever written. It's like almost as long as the novella I wrote that I released this month. So it's just that
Awesome.
one chapter.
Well, speaking of the rest of the series, what can you tell us about the rest of the spellslinger, spellbinders and gunslinger series?
Yeah, so the second book, The Children of the Black Moon, that is going to be coming out at the end of May. So it'll be picking up right where the Bleeding Stone leaves off. So
Awesome.
any visceral reaction to that ending, you'll see where it picks up fairly quickly from there. I also recently released. I'm waiting for my Kindle to wake up. There we go. Pale Night Red Field, which is a prequel novella. It's free for all my newsletter subscribers, so you can hop on my website and sign up for my newsletter. You can also just pick it up for $1 on Amazon. Um, book 3 of the series I'm working on right now. I'm about like 20,000 words into it at the moment. And that'll be releasing some point early next year is my plan.
Okay.
Not planning any releases for the rest of this year
Okay.
after book 2, just because
That gives us
one
time to.
yeah, and
All these
that
writers that like to like release like multiple books in the same year. I'm like, but us readers need time to read all these books.
yeah, and part of it's that, but also part of it's just I'm getting married this year, so
Oh, congratulations.
I need to like focus more on that.
I guess.
Um, but I'm also going to be releasing another prequel novella between the releases of the second and third books. So keep an eye on that. The novellas were really kind of like a way to like there are like 2 tribes that I don't really that ultimately I don't really focus a lot on in the in like the main narrative, and that's the Haunted tribe and the Arrow
Mm-hmm.
tribe. And Pale Knight Redfield focuses on the Haunted Tribe.
Oh,
And the second novella is going to focus on the Arrow Tribe.
awesome.
But yeah, that is going to be the series right there. So three
So a trilogy.
novels and two novellas.
Okay, cool. Not too long, not too bad.
Yeah. So yeah, about hopefully maybe like this. And also I'm doing a Kickstarter right now to fund
Right.
an audiobook for the Bleeding Stone. So it's so so hoping to work with RJ Bailey, who's done audiobooks for a lot of SPIFFO finalists and semifinalists. So he's worked with LL McRae, Trudy Skies, Holly Tinsley, a lot of other people. He's absolutely incredible. Perfect narrative voice, and genuinely a really great dude. So I have the Kickstarter link in a pinned tweet on my Twitter. It's just at Joe Lee __. And yeah, pop on over there.
Yeah.
Give me money, please. I want to do I want to do this audiobook.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll have a link to all of Joe's his socials and his website, his newsletter, and the Kickstarter, and all of that down in the description below for anyone that's watching this back later. I'll have those included down below. Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining. That's all the questions that I had for you. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I thank you, Kate, for having me on. This has been a blast.
Really? I'm glad. Maybe next year we will be talking about a new book.
Yeah, I mean, could be talking about the end of the series and then and all the fun stuff that comes along with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining, and thank you to everyone out there that was watching us or is watching us. Tune in next week. We're going to have John Palladino on here talking about the trials of Ashmount, which I've been told by Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative is the most grimdark book of grimdark books. So I'm looking forward to going from the Bleeding Stone into that book.
Yeah, it's sitting on my Kindle to be read at some point soon too. So
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining, and I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day.